Hey guys, I'm Sean from Bluehub, and today I'm going to be going through managing different locations within Deer. Now, I'm going to kind of tell you how this functionality works, and less so much suggest how you actually use it, just because it can be used in a variety of ways to save on either admin or to improve visibility. It's kind of up to you on which one of those routes you want to take, so I will just lay out your options and how it works for you, and that you decide from there. So from here, our dashboard, we're going to want to go into our settings and our reference books. Now, in case you didn't know, our reference books are basically where we have all of our back-end data on Deer that we're going to pull from in all of our areas of the system. So we'll have things like our tax rules, payment terms, carriers, and our locations all found within here if we ever want to manage them. So if we click into that, down on our right here within our stock section, we then have our locations and bins, or if we go up to our top, we can click onto the stock option, and then it's going to be right here. We can then click into that, and we're going to get given a list of all of the current warehouses we have inside of this system, or account, I should say. So currently, as you can see, we have quite a few because they're test accounts, but we can see here on the right that some of these have been deprecated. They've got the little tick to say that they've been deprecated and they're not in use. Now, this means they're not going to appear on any kind of purchase orders or sales orders as a place we can receive stock or put stock, pull stock from for orders, but that it does still exist. Now, typically you would want to delete them by pressing the X button if you can, but the error you'll often get when trying to do that, as you'll see here, is that because there is transactions stored against this location, you can't actually physically delete it. This means that usually if you are going to be deleting locations, it's only really possible after a transactional wipe if the location is ever being used. Now just to quickly highlight what a location is. So in Deer's eyes, locations are typically going to be things like warehouses. Now the reason I say that is because when we're using our locations in Deer, Deer is going to presume that you're working out of a location. This is for things like the WMS app. You'll only be able to sign into a specific warehouse. Whenever you're fulfilling an order, you'll be able to pull goods from a specific warehouse. If you then want to actually pull stock from a different location or a different warehouse, you would have to transfer stock from one warehouse to the other. So if you're only looking to use sub-locations and you want to pick stock from either one location or the other, having a second location probably isn't the way for you. You're more likely going to want to use things like bins to manage that stock in that case. So to jump into one of these locations, and I can show you some of the settings we have here. So when we create a new location, it will look like this. We'll first provide a name for our location, so this one is called CF. We could rename that to whatever we want. Providing it falls within a 255 character limit, as far as I'm aware. We can then select a couple of settings on the left here. So starting at the top, we have default. So default means it's your primary warehouse in Deer's terms, and it means every time you create a new purchase order, it doesn't have a default location against the supplier. It's always going to go into this warehouse. So if you do have a primary warehouse where you're doing most of your goods managing or good management from, you're going to want to use the default location against it. Once we've decided if it's going to be our default location, in this instance this isn't going to be the default location in this account. From here we can then select a couple of other options. Firstly, fixed assets. If this is going to be a storage location for our fixed assets that we're going to be using, we can tick that option there. Next, we can have allow to reorder stock level. So this is just going to mean this is going to appear on the reorder report. The next option here we have is shop floor. So if we're going to be doing production orders in this location, we will want it to be a shop floor. What that will allow us to do is we can then have work centers against this location where we can actually process production orders. So that's quite an important one if you're going to be using production. Next we have co-manufacturing, which is the same kind of field, except for this indicates that it's a supplier location where we're going to be sending our goods for co-manufacturing. We have another video covering all of co-manufacturing, but just to briefly cover this exact what it is for this setting. If you ever have any goods that you send to a supplier so that they can do work on those goods, whether that be engraving, painting, anything like that, and you pay them for that service, that is classed as co-manufacturing. if you need a location for sending those goods, so you're going to transfer a good to a location so that for them to do that work on it, it would be a co-manufacturing location like so. And what it's going to mean is it's going to hide it from all of your standard operations and limit it to only co-manufacturing operations. Next here we have deprecated. That just means it's no longer in use, as is usually a rule in dir. Anything deprecated is almost archived in dir's eyes. And then finally we have use directed receive / put away. Now what this is it's a rule for your bins, and it's essentially going to suggest you different bins on your stock receiving lines based on a certain rule set. So if you want it to be alphabetical, whether you want to fill up your empty bins or bins already with that stock in it, that's up to you on how you want to manage that. It's probably worth some thinking about and a bit of a play with. However, typically you probably just want to go with empty first. Next, from here we can add in a address on the right side here. Now this is purely for internal referencing, so if you want it to appear on things like templates and things, you can pull it through with merge fields, or if you want to come into the warehouse to see where it's located, you can do so. It doesn't really have any use beyond that, it's just there for those purposes. Then we have our description. So our description is just an internal note on what the warehouse is going to be used for. This may be overlooked, as typically you're going to know why you have a warehouse, or it's for reason A, reason B. However, this field can be quite useful for anyone who doesn't understand the full operations, or any external people looking at your dir account, such as Bluehub. In our case, there will be a lot of times where we have warehouses that we're looking at, and it could be, say, for point of sale, but we wouldn't know that because we haven't got a description here. So it may be overlooked, but it probably is worth adding. Next we have transfer planning, and what this allows us to do is transfer goods between warehouses periodically based on demand. So if we set up a transfer plan for this warehouse, we can meet a different warehouse's demand based on, we can supply another warehouse's demand every certain period. So whether we want to fulfill another warehouse's demand monthly, weekly, etc. What this is really useful for is if you've got a warehouse that's your primary warehouse, and then you are just purchasing goods into that warehouse and transferring goods there from there then into other locations. I've got an error there about dir servers. I'm not sure why that is, but yeah, this is quite a rare one, and if anything, we usually use the MRP run for this. However, there is a decent description of what this can be used for here if you want to pause and read it. Next we have our bins. Within our bins, we have a couple of options. So firstly, we have our bin name. We then have our options for staging and deprecated. So whenever we're making a new bin, we're just going to press the plus button here. We'll add a new name, such as, in this case, we'll just do bin 2. We can then tick whether we want it to be a staging bin, and what that means essentially is that it's just a temporary bin where goods are going to be in a semi-received state. So, for example, if you was loading goods from your truck into your warehouse, putting them on the floor, and then transferring them then from there into their actual bin, when you put them on the floor, you could have that floor space as a staging bin, where the goods are temporarily in between being put away. And then finally here we have our deprecated option, where we can tick this to archive the bin, or we can press the X to delete the bin. Now when pressing the X to delete the bin, similarly as with locations, if there are any transactions held against this bin or any stock held against this bin, this is not going to be possible. It's just going to throw an error at you. However, since I've just created this bin, it's going to allow me to do it. If I was to go back into general and I was use directed putting away, and then to come back into bins, you'll see we get another option here for rule, and we can set up some rules on how we want to put our stock away. Now, this could probably use its own video, really, but just to show you briefly, you can set up rules on rules behind your bins on how much stock you want to store there, in terms of space, in terms of quantities, and in terms of weights. So if you have a shelf that's quite poorly structured, you may not want to go above a certain weight in that bin. So if you're using directed put away, and you're below this max weight, or above this max weight, sorry, it's not going to recommend you put anything into that bin. Or if you have a max weight of 50 kilos and you've got goods coming in of 100 kilos, it's only going to recommend you actually put half in that bin. I hope that's useful. Like I said, this is probably use its own video to be fair. So if you do want a video on that, please let us know in the comments. But it is quite easy to figure out as you go, I suppose. It's just going to be maximum quantities for those bins, essentially. So that's going to be everything in terms of bins. Next, we have pick zones. This is just purely a reference field that we can print off on pick notes, and it's going to be a useful field for our pickers to know where they're actually going to be picking the goods from. So, for example, if we had warehouse room 1 on here, they'd know that inside of warehouse, we're going to go to room 1. Now, if you remember me saying at the start, we have what our locations technically are is a warehouse in Deer's eyes. So that's why we would then split up our warehouse into different zones where our pickers might go to pick goods, because we wouldn't want a separate location for those zones, because that could cause issues, and we wouldn't necessarily want a separate bin for those zones because we would have bins within those zones. So we would have our bins where we're storing our goods against them, and then our bins would be within a zone. Next, we have our supply rules. So supply rules, this is mainly used for the MRP run, and I will cover it more within that video. But just to quickly jump into it, within here we can kind of map out different supply-demand actions. So based on demand, we are going to get supply from purchasing, transfers, production, etc. Once again, I will cover this more deeply in a MRP video, most likely. However, for now, it can be used to map out how you want to procure goods for your location based on demand. And then finally, we have our delivery calendar, and within here we can schedule different deliveries and when they're coming in. And this can just be used as a reference field in your calendar, so you can see that you're having a delivery in X intervals. So that's going to be it in terms of actual locations, sir, and setting those up. If I jump into a product really quick now, preferably one we do have stock against, however I'm not sure what that would be, so I'll just jump into any. I'll show you where we can then actually specify these fields. So within here, you'll see immediately that we can select a pick zone for this good, and that's just going to be an area of which we're going to pick. Once again, it's not going to map to anything we just discussed, that is just purely a reference field. We then have our stock locator, which is going to be another reference field, once again, just for pointing our pickers in the right direction. These fields aren't going to have any kind of stock held against them, they're just there so that you kind of know where to look. We should then have our default location here, and within our default location, you'll see that we have all of our different warehouses, and we have our bins within the warehouse. So if we want to, we can either specify that this, if we're purchasing this good, it go to this warehouse, or we can specify to the level of when we're purchasing this good, we want it to go to this bin in this warehouse, if that's where it belongs. Obviously that then may be overwrote by your directed put away rules, but usually if you're not using any specific rules for your directed put away, this is how you do it. You'd specify a default location for these, and then you'd be putting away into those specific bins if that's where the product belongs. Finally here, I'll show you stock. So here you can see kind of how stock is delegated out. We have different locations within here, and we have stock stored separately against each location. These locations are not made at the stock level. We can't go against this item and add in a new stock location. These are referencing what we just saw and created on the back end. So that's one that does come with a lot of confusion, so I'll just preface that one more time. We do not create locations against our products. Our products are stored against our locations, and that'll be done via things like purchases, inventory adjustments, or stock takes. You can then see the quantities available in those locations, split out a bit more here, and also if we did have bins, you could also see it split out per bin here. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please do leave them in the comments, and I'm looking forward to hearing any feedback you have, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.